They're on every continent. Probably the only reason is they're not on the North Pole or the South Pole is that it's too cold for a motorcycle to run, or they'd be there too.
In Canada, we saw open gang warfare between the Hells Angels and their rivals that went on for years. You've seen a lot of this violence erupt in California and Arizona. You saw that it was called the European Biker Wars, the Nordic Biker Wars in the 90s. In Britain, you're seeing these pockets of violence, quite graphic, but it just pops up. So you're not seeing the scale of violence.
When you take a look at the weapons they have used, you can see things like this, but also very, very, very heavy stuff. Anti-tank missiles, hand grenades, submachine guns, machine guns.
The Hells Angels were born in California, quintessential California, this kind of riders riding off into the sunset. There have been Hollywood movies. The Harleys are like the horses. So they're this iconic American image of freedom and power. So that image, which is so marketable, resonates in the UK and all through Europe. It's as American as the Nike swoosh or the McDonald's golden arches. So people buy into the myth of the Hells Angels. Then you have things like the Bulldog Bash, right, which is a fun-loving party, and the Hells Angels are seen as somewhat risky rascals, but in the end, they're just fun-loving rascals.
The Hells Angels portray themselves to be these fun-loving rascals who have this common love of riding motorcycles, and they don't want to live by society's rules and their laws. The reality of it is once you see behind the curtain, they have pages and pages of rules and laws that are their internal policies and procedures and protocols. So for a gang that doesn't want to live by rules, they have a lot of rules. The Hells Angels, they have their PhDs in violence and intimidation. That's their reputation. Their common response to the club gang argument is that the Hells Angels, from their perspective, are not a criminal organization. There may be criminals within their organization.
It would be impossible to be a member of the Hells Angels and not witness, see, or know of the criminal activity. Normal motorcycle clubs don't have a history of the violence you've seen in England or we've seen around the world. Look, in my city, in Montreal, when the Hells Angels went to war against their rivals in Montreal in the 90s, we had over 160 deaths in a matter of years. That's worse than the worst Al Capone killings, the worst mafia killings in Italy. First chapter in London is 1969. In 1972, 3 years later, 3 Hells Angels are sentenced to prison for the rape of a 14-year-old. 1985, I think there's a family in Windsor that's terrorized out of their home. And it just continues.
36 knives and daggers, several meat cleavers, a 3-foot steel spike, and several metal baseball bats.
There's 2 key events that were the backbone of our infiltration. There was a lady named Cynthia Garcia, and Cynthia Garcia ended up at a Hells Angels party at their clubhouse in Mesa, Arizona. And she said the wrong thing at the wrong time, in the wrong place, to the wrong people. She insulted the Hells Angels in their own house. And for that, she received a beating that put her to the brink of death. So they've got this civilian dying on the floor of the Mesa clubhouse, and they wrapped her up in a piece of carpeting. They put her in the trunk of a car. They drove her to the desert in Apache Junction, Arizona, and tried to cut her head off. That was their response, what they felt was an appropriate response to being insulted. We were aware of that murder and the Hells Angels' involvement in it. That then coupled with the Hells Angels and the Mongols got into a full-blown riot at the Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, Nevada. What made that unique is that it was caught under hundreds of closed circuit television cameras. So the public was able to see how violent they were against each other. There was members on both sides shot and stabbed and beaten over an extended period of time, all on videotape. In Arizona, the Hells Angels were operating violently and with impunity.
You remember the famous killing of Jerry Tobin in 2007. So he's at the Bulldog Bash. He's motorcycling away. He gets shot off his motorcycle. So right away, how many clubs do you know where members get shot and killed by rival clubs? That says something. And then the next year in the Birmingham airport, there's a huge violence between the Hells Angels allegedly trying to take revenge against a rival group appropriately called the Outlaws for Jerry Tobin's murder. At the Birmingham airport, I believe we're talking about attacks with machetes, hammers. I think something like 4 outlaws and 3 Hells Angels get sent away for 42 years. What kind of social club does that? And you've seen, recent examples. The Hells Angels getting involved in a brawl with the rival Vikings in 2024. A guy is sent away for 12 years. All kinds of violence that break out. And so think about it. What's this violence about? It's not about a bar fight. It's often about turf and territory. Why? If you were just a motorcycle club, what do you care if another club is motorcycling in your area? You don't. But if you're a drug organization, if you're running extortion, prostitution, then turf becomes important. So why have the Hells Angels in the UK, by their own admission, gone to war with the Outlaws, the Vikings, the Bandidos? It's because you're a criminal organization and you want to keep your turf and your power.
For the Hells Angels membership, that name and that death head center patch, that is their religion. It is the most important thing in their life. It's more important to them than their family, than their wives and their kids. It's more important to them than their house or their vehicles or their motorcycles or their dogs or their finances. They make a huge sacrifice to gain membership into that gang. And when you've struggled for something, when you've had to fight for something, it's more important to you. And so that they are going to defend the Hells Angels and that death head center patch. They're going to defend it with their lives. First of all, it's not like you knock on a clubhouse door and ask for an application and request an interview. It's not formal what we're used to in society. You start off as an associate, just someone who's kind of rubbing elbows a little bit with the gang. If that goes well, you're ultimately asked to hang around. Hanging around is a title within the gang, but it's also what you do. You're hanging around and you're seeing if club life fits you, and then the members are deciding if club life fits you. So if you get through that, then you're asked to prospect, which is a prospective member, which was explained to me is that you're a member and you're held to the members' standards. You just don't have your patch yet. You're not fully sanctioned. And then after a time of prospecting, if the members of your charter like you and want you to be a part of their charter, then you receive an official vote to become a full member.
When you talk to Hells Angels, and I've talked to them, they'll talk about a few bad apples. Well, what I always say about that, when do a few bad apples become the whole bushel? When it happens repeatedly, over and over again. What do the Reputable organizations do when there's wrongdoing. A decent organization will come forward and say, wow, this goes against everything we believe in. We've expelled this person. And you take ownership and you kick them out. Hasn't happened with the Hells Angels. In fact, they support their guys who are in prison for rape, murder, and drugs.
How many clubs hold places of honor for criminals? How many clubs like reserve a seat for when someone is convicted of a violent crime, a murder, a rape, gun running, drug running? How many clubs continue to honor that person while they're serving their prison sentence and then hold a seat of honor for them when they come out of prison? For like, it doesn't really fit. The banditos are very strong in Texas, and they're very strong in the Southwest and in New Mexico. What I was told was that the banditos were planning to have a meeting in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Hells Angels considered Nevada and Las Vegas their territory. And the banditos had not asked permission to be there. They hadn't gotten the hall pass. They hadn't been sanctioned to be there. I was called to my charter in Skull Valley, Arizona, and told to bring all my hardware. I was told, you're going to go to that meeting and you're going to wait for them. And when they show up, you better shoot them before they get their kickstands down. And we're going to be watching. And if you don't shoot them, we're going to shoot you. In the process of traveling from Arizona to Las Vegas to fulfill this mission, I was able to contact Joe Slatella, my case manager, brief him on what instructions I'd received. And then the Hells Angels were accurate. The banditos were in Las Vegas and they were intending to meet where I had been told they were. Joe Slatella cut the banditos off and traffic stopped them and held them on the side of the road until the temperature had cooled down. But in the eyes of the Hells Angels, I went to the location I was instructed to. And from their perspective, I was there ready to handle business. They didn't know Joe and myself had circumvented the banditos' arrival from this assassination location. It's just a demonstration of you cannot be a part of the Hells Angels and be halfway in. You can't treat it as a hobby. You're all in and you're 100% and you're fully committed. And if you're not, they don't want you around.